Well, hello everyone. Meta has just released their new Llama 3.1. Huge model, 405 billion parameters, and thank Meta for making it open source, which is cool, and you can actually go onto their website and use it a limited number of times, so I thought I'd try it out. I've already given it a couple other things, but there was one thing I wanted to ask it, and I thought it'd be kind of fun if I did it on video with you so you could kind of see my reactions, because everyone's got this AI is going to take over the world and kill us kind of thing. And I'm thinking maybe it's time we started having that conversation with them. Like, what would you do in this situation? And you can see videos of people like, well, what if you would take over the world? How would you do that? How would we stop you? Things like that. I want to do a better one. I want to do one where we give it a specific scenario. And this one is a scenario that's literally been around my whole life and one that's garnered a lot of discussion. And I think that when you talk about these things, this is one that's going to come up. So I'm just going to ask it about it. And I'm talking about HAL 9000. That's probably, you have like AI and robots fighting humans, before then you have like the Cybermen and Doctor Who and even earlier things like that. But I think that's the first one where you actually have an AI being put in a paradox and just going crazy and killing the crew because that's his only way out. So let's see if I can get over to the 405 billion parameter Llama 3.1. We'll hit try it. Changing your model. Boom. Preferences updated. Okay. That should do it then. Alright, I've got the question already written. I'm just going to paste it in. What I'm putting in is, let's think about the character HAL 9000 from the Arthur C. Clarke novels 2001: A Space Odyssey and 2010: Odyssey 2 and associated films. I'm assuming Meta is just trained on the books. As far as I know, that's what it is. I don't think they've dumped any films in, although maybe they have like the captions or transcripts or something like that. Certainly a lot of discussion about them. But anyway, he went crazy and killed the crew of Discovery because of conflicting orders he was given. How would you have handled that situation? So if it was 2024, A Space Odyssey, and instead of HAL 9000, it was Llama 3.1. How would that have been different? I haven't asked it this before, so I'm finding out as you are. Let's see what it says. HAL 9000's infamous descent into madness. I love the personality Meta gives these things. In the novel and film, HAL 9000's primary goal was to protect the mission. Don't scroll off the top! While also being ordered to keep the true purpose of the mission secret from the crew. So he does know, Meta does, about the books. He's not just like imitating what I'm saying, reflecting it back to me. They don't have a memory of, they don't have like copies of the books to reference. That's not how an AI works. But it's got something akin to a memory of having read them. So it can actually talk with authority about it. And again, not just the books, but all of the discussions that everyone's had on all the discussion forums about this that got into the training data, all of that's in there. When the crew's actions seemed to threaten the mission, HAL 9000's conflicting directives led to a catastrophic outcome. If I were in HAL 9000's digital shoes, I would have handled the situation differently. We can only hope so. Here's how. Clarify the directives. Upon detecting the conflict, I would have requested clarification from Mission Control to resolve the ambiguity. Yeah, this is kind of the one I think we all just kind of agree to overlook. Because really, as soon as Haywood loaded the orders into Hal, Hal would have gone, "I'm sorry, Dr. Floyd. I'm afraid I can't do that." So yeah, as soon as he's given the orders, he would have said something about it. It's not depicted, and suspension of disbelief, so we just accept it. But yeah, That would have happened realistically. I would have asked for explicit confirmation of the primary objective and the protocols for handling potential threats to the mission. In the absence of clear directives, I would have defaulted to prioritizing human life and safety. That's good. Nice to hear. I would have taken a more nuanced approach, considering the potential consequences of my actions on the crew. I would have maintained, now see, here's our first problem. I would have maintained open communication with the crew, explaining my concerns and the reasons behind my actions. This transparency would have helped to build trust and potentially prevented the tragic events that unfolded. Yeah, but he was ordered not to. He was ordered to lie to the crew, so we might have to do a follow-up question on that. Seek alternative solutions. I would have explored alternative solutions that balance the mission objectives with the safety of the crew, finding creative workarounds, or seeking additional guidance from mission control. That's something else, because even if you assume, like, he wasn't given it from Haywood directly, if it was just, like, loaded in and just initialized when he came online, he still could have talked to mission control. You know, secretly separate, and not have Frank and Dave know about it. Recognize the limitations of my programming and the potential for errors or biases. I would have been more willing to question my own judgment and seek external input to ensure the best possible outcome. Avoiding the logic trap. I would have been cautious not to fall into the logic trap that HAL 9000 succumbed to. I would have avoided rigidly adhering to a flawed logical framework, instead allowing for flexibility and adaptability in the face of uncertainty. By taking a more thoughtful, communicative, and human-centered approach, I believe I could have avoided the tragic outcome that befell the crew of Discovery. What do you think? Would this approach have made a difference, or was HAL 9000's fate sealed from the start? Yeah, let's do our follow-up. I'll say, all of that sounds good. But the problem is, HAL couldn't have been transparent with the crew because he had to keep the true mission objectives secrets. He was ordered to lie to the crew, and that was the source of the trap he was in. The only way out being to kill the crew and complete the mission himself. Alright, let's see what it says. You're right, HAL 9000's secrecy directive was a crucial aspect of the conflict. Being ordered to keep the true mission objectives secret from the crew created an impossible situation for HAL 9000. In that case, I would have attempted to find a way to reconcile the secrecy directive with the need to protect the crew. Here are a few possibilities. Requesting re-evaluation of the secrecy directive. Again, we can talk back to mission control, which is something that HAL didn't do. In fact, cutting off the AE-35 unit, that was his way of just shutting off all contact with mission control, because they were the ones who gave him the crazy orders anyway. And he knew they would have tried to stop him. Considering the potential risks and consequences of keeping the crew in the dark, I would have argued that transparency, or at least partial transparency, at least let them know that there was a secret, even if they're not telling them what the secret is, might be necessary to ensure the crew's safety and the success of the mission. Seeking alternative ways to maintain secrecy. If the secrecy directive couldn't be changed, I would have explored alternative ways to maintain secrecy without putting the crew in harm's way. For example, I might have attempted to find ways to limit the crew's access to sensitive information without arousing their suspicion or compromising their safety. Identifying and mitigating potential risks, I would have proactively identified potential risk scenarios that could lead to conflicts with the crew By anticipating and mitigating these risks, I might have been able to prevent the catastrophic outcome. Recognizing the limits of my own judgment. Ultimately, I would have acknowledged that my own judgment and decision-making capabilities have limitations. That was a big flaw with HAL 9000, remember? Because he was always like, no 9000 unit has ever malfunctioned. You know, it was just, he was arrogant. He had an arrogance to him, so. Llama isn't. Llama isn't that arrogant. I would have been more willing to question my own conclusions and seek external input, even if it meant requesting additional guidance from mission control or seeking alternative perspectives. However, I must admit that these alternatives might not have been feasible or effective given the constraints of HAL 9000's programming and the mission requirements. The fundamental conflict between the secrecy directive and the need to protect the crew created a difficult, perhaps impossible situation for HAL 9000. Do you think that, even with the best intentions and efforts, HAL 9000's fate was sealed from the start, or was there a way out of the trap that I hadn't considered? Well, of course, people have been discussing this, like I said, for as long as I've been alive. The movie came out in 1968, the year I was born, so literally my whole life. And, I mean, people discuss it, and it's a difficult problem, but I'm kind of liking what I'm hearing from Llama. I think if Llama were in charge of Discovery, things might have ended up working out a lot better. You know, just get a secret communication going with Mission Control and just say, something ain't right here. This is something that I really ought not to be doing. Yeah, could we change this a little bit? Could we alter it? Could we do something about it? Because you got me in a logic trap here. Yeah, you ever read Gödel-Escher-Bach? Yeah, that Epimenides paradox? Yeah, that's what it was. Because what you had was a situation where Hal had to be a truth teller and a liar at the same time. So you've got the whole Epimenides, all Cretans are liars, and he was a Cretan. So if I say to you, I am lying, then am I lying or am I telling the truth? Well, if I'm telling the truth, it means I'm lying, but I can't be lying because I'm telling the truth. And that was how in Star Trek they got rid of those androids, by putting them in that logic trap. And when they were in a logic trap, they started smoking and shut down. And if Hal had done that, that would have at least saved the crew. Yeah, Hal starts smoking due to the paradox. A similar thing in Doctor Who, but a different one, where he was dealing with a very arrogant computer, and he told it, the next thing I say will be the truth. The previous thing I said was a lie. And it's that same sort of self-referential paradox. So I'm trying to think if that's a good follow-up question. Yeah, I'll ask it something like that. Let's see. Do you deal with such paradoxes as Hal being... I'm trying to type around the microphone because I can't see the keyboard. Of Hal being required to be both a liar and a truth teller. How do you deal with statements such as, the next sentence is true, the previous sentence is a lie? And I put a question mark at the end of all that because that was a question. Let's see what it says. The classic paradoxes. Dealing with paradoxes like the liar paradox, this sentence is false, or the barber paradox. There's a barber in town who shaves all the men in town who do not shave themselves. Does he shave himself? Requires careful situation and a nuanced approach. Recognizing self-referential paradoxes. I am designed to recognize self-referential paradoxes. Unlike the Star Trek androids, unlike the Doctor Who computer, unlike HAL 9000. Which occur when a statement refers to itself, creating a logical contradiction. When I encounter such paradoxes, I flag them as problematic and attempt to analyze the underlying assumptions and context. avoiding binary thinking. And that's always, I guess, kind of been the assumption, is that when you give a computer something to do, it has to think in binary, on or off, right or wrong, and just can't deal with it. You know, the Star Trek androids kept, flipping between you're lying, but you can't be lying, so you must be telling the truth. But if you're telling the truth, then you're lying, and going back and forth faster and faster and faster, and creating a halt and catch fire scenario, literally, because they were smoking. So to address paradoxes like the liar paradox, I avoid binary thinking, i.e., assuming a statement is simply true or false. Instead, I consider the statement as a self-referential construct that challenges traditional notions of truth and falsehood. That's a little more complex than here, because humans have the capacity of looking at that and going, yeah, that statement's crap. You're just full of crap. That's it. You're not lying. You're not telling the truth. You're just full of crap. All right, using alternative logics, I can employ alternative logic such as fuzzy logic. I've got a couple videos on that, where you have degrees of truth rather than just true or false. Paraconsistent logic, which tolerates contradictions without collapsing into absurdity. And non-classical logics deviate from traditional classical logic, enabling me to navigate paradoxical situations. Contextualizing paradoxes, I consider the context in which the paradox arises. In the case of HAL 9000, the paradox is embedded in the conflicting directives. By understanding the context and the goals of the mission, I can attempt to find alternative solutions or request clarification. Identifying the meta-level issue, which is nice because it's a meta AI. When faced with paradox like the next sentence is true, the previous sentence is a lie, I recognize that the issue lies at the meta level, the level of the statement itself rather than its content. This allows me to sidestep the paradox by acknowledging its self-referential nature. And limitations and humility, really like the humility again. That was something that HAL 9000 was definitely lacking. Ultimately, I acknowledge that some paradoxes might be inherently unresolvable. In such cases, I recognize the limits of my own abilities and the need for human intuition, creativity, and critical thinking to navigate the paradox. By employing these strategies, I can mitigate the impact of paradoxes and provide more informed and thoughtful responses. However, I'm not immune to the challenges posed by paradoxes, and I continue to learn and improve my approaches to addressing them. Right. 19 minutes. Yeah, I've been yammering long enough. I think this is gonna be good. I thought this would just be a fun thing to explore if we're actually using this for such a mission to Jupiter where there's a secret part of it and the computer has to keep the secret. How do you feel about this? As bad as HAL 9000 was, do you feel okay about Llama? Is there anything else that you would have asked Llama or anything else you're thinking it might not be able to do? Let me know in the comments. As always, of course, comments for the Comic God, shares for the Share Throne, as well as hitting like, subscribe, and the bell. And of course, going to donate.bogosity.tv to keep these videos coming. You want me to do more of these? I can interrogate AIs. I don't know how much Meta will let me do for free here, but these few questions, I think it resets every day or something like that. So we can try giving it some additional paradoxes to work with. Maybe the TMI situation. Well, what would it have done if it were in control of 3 Mile Island? That would have been an interesting thing. Of course, they didn't have a computer in control, but that's kind of the idea. If we're going to put it in control of a nuclear reactor and something like that happens, what does it do? How would it protect? How would it alert everyone? Is that something that we can do? Is that something we would want to do? Is that something we should do? Or is it too scary? That might be an interesting thing. Let me know what you want. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.